Donald Trump thought he had this super smart idea to use his youngest son, Barron, like a shield. He probably figured nobody would go after the kid, but boy was he wrong. This lady, Jasmine Crockett, totally made it feel safe for Barron to talk freely, and get this, in the next hour and a half, everything changed. It didn't just mess up Trump's money plans, it also broke this whole idea that he had complete power over his own family. Okay, so the story starts with the former big boss showing up at this important government meeting, bringing Barron along. Barron, who's 19 now, is actually listed as a junior boss of some of the Trump buildings they were looking into. They walked in all coordinated, dad and son in matching blue suits, looking like a team ready to fight against what Trump was calling an unfair investigation. But no matter how much they tried to look united, Jasmine Crockett saw something right away. She noticed that Barron's eyes weren't really meeting his dad's, and his hands were shaking just a little bit, even though he was trying to look calm. The room where they were, a big one in the Capitol building, was set up differently for this meeting. Usually, lots of reporters and people can just walk in, but today it was limited to only 15 reporters who were picked beforehand. The room even felt a bit cooler than normal, around 65 degrees, which made things feel a little uncomfortable, matching the tense feeling in the air. Behind the people on the committee, there were two big American flags standing tall, and the government symbol was right there in the middle. The lights were adjusted too, a little brighter over where Trump and Barron were sitting, kind of like a spotlight on a stage, so you could see every little look on their faces. The most interesting thing, though, was how they were sitting. It wasn't the usual side-by-side setup. At Jasmine Crockett's suggestion, the table was in an L shape, with Barron sitting across from his dad. This might seem like a small thing, but it was really clever. It made it impossible for Trump to just stare at his son all the time without everyone seeing him turn his head. Old Mr. Trump didn't like this at first and tried to stop it, but they said no because of the rules. Now as the meeting got going, you could really see why this seating plan was smart. They had 6 microphones placed just right, one for each person being asked questions and one for each of the 4 main people on the committee. The recording system was even upgraded just for this meeting, so it could pick up even tiny whispers. They also had hidden cameras that weren't just watching faces, but hands too, since that's often where you first see if someone is nervous. In front of Barron, there was just a thin folder and a bottle of water. That's it. But in a big contrast, Donald Trump had a pile of red folders, 3 electronic things that were turned off like they were supposed to be, and a whole team of 3 lawyers sitting behind him. Barron didn't have his own lawyer there, something Jasmine Crockett definitely noticed and marked down in her notes with 3 red stars. Besides the people officially involved, there were 24 other people in the room. These were helpers for the government people, money experts, security guards, and the chosen reporters. What was really noticeable was that no other Trump family members were there, not his wife or any of his other kids, even though people thought they might show up to support him. The chairs saved for them were really obviously empty, which a bunch of reporters were already writing about. The boss of the committee started things off with the usual introductions, explaining that the meeting was about looking into big differences in the money paperwork for Trump's properties run by family members. After months of avoiding and using lawyers to get out of it, Donald Trump finally agreed to talk, bringing Barron along, who had recently been put in charge of some of the properties they were looking at. Then the boss handed things over to Representative Jasmine Crockett for the first round to asking questions. Trump acted super confident, fixing his microphone in a relaxed way and saying hello to some of the committee members by name while completely ignoring others. When it was Crockett's turn to speak, Trump leaned over and whispered something in Barron's ear. The young man didn't move, just stared straight at the table in front of him, and you could see his throat move as he swallowed hard. "Mr. Trump, thank you for finally agreeing to come today," Crockett began in a calm voice, her voice clear across the room even though she wasn't shouting. She wore a neat blue jacket over a simple white shirt, her hair pulled back neatly. Her only jewelry was a pair of gold earrings. In front of her were folders with different colors, each with tabs lined up perfectly, red, blue, green, and yellow, set up in a specific order.
And Barron, I appreciate you being here today. I want you to know I understand this is a sensitive family situation. Trump immediately cut her off, leaning forward to speak directly into his microphone. Representative, I want to make it clear that my son is here just to watch. Any questions about our businesses should be asked to me. His voice had that familiar sound, the confident tone he had perfected over years of business deals and TV shows. But those who knew him well might have seen an unusual tense look around his eyes. Crockett allowed herself a small smile. That's an interesting statement, Mr.
Trump, considering I have company papers here signed this January listing Barron as an executive director of 3 properties under investigation. She slid a blue folder forward containing official copies of the company papers with Barron's signature highlighted in yellow. Her movement was slow, deliberate, as she handed out copies to the committee members. Would you like to change what you said about your son's role? Trump quickly responded. Corporate titles are often just for show, Representative. Barron is learning the business, but all decisions go through me. He shifted slightly in his chair, his right hand going to adjust his tie in a move familiar to anyone who had watched his public appearances over the years. Crockett then turned her attention to Barron for the first time. Barron, can you confirm that these are your signatures on these documents from January 2025? Her tone softened a bit, professional but without the sharp edge she had used with the older Trump. The young man hesitated, glancing briefly at his father, then at the documents. The silence stretched for 3 full seconds, which felt like forever in a situation like this. Yes, those are my signatures, he finally answered, his voice quiet but clear. His posture remained stiff, his shoulders slightly hunched forward in his perfectly fitted suit that somehow seemed too big for his frame in that moment. Trump adjusted in his chair, his hands now gripping the armrests tightly. One of his lawyers leaned forward, trying to get his attention, but Trump ignored him. The room, which had been filled with a constant low buzz of small movements and whispers, became noticeably quieter. A reporter in the second row stopped typing completely, her fingers suspended above her keyboard as she watched the scene unfold. Mr. Trump, Crockett continued, now with a green folder in hand, her movements purposeful and unhurried. In your initial statement, you claimed that all family-managed properties follow identical standard accounting procedures. And is that correct? She maintained eye contact with Trump as she opened the folder, her expression neutral but attentive. Absolutely, Trump responded with renewed confidence, leaning back slightly. We have the best accountants, the best systems, everything standardized, everything transparent. He gestured broadly with his right hand, a characteristic move that had punctuated countless campaign speeches and press conferences. Crockett removed 2 sets of documents from the green folder. I have here the standard operating procedures for revenue management from the Trump International Hotel, D.C., managed by your son Donald Jr., and from Trump Tower Bickle, one of the properties under Barron's official direction. She placed the documents side by side on a projector, and the contents appeared on a large screen visible to everyone in the room. The committee will notice that the procedures for international transfers differ significantly, with Barron's property allowing single approvals for transfers up to $10 million, while other family properties require multiple approvals for amounts exceeding $1 million. As the documents remained displayed on screen, Crockett allowed a moment for the information to sink in. The sound of camera shutters filled the brief silence as photographers captured Trump's expression. His face maintained its practiced confidence while a muscle twitched almost without being seen at his jawline. His breathing had become more visible, his chest noticeably expanding beneath his navy blue suit. Different properties, different needs, Trump declared. There's nothing irregular about that. His voice maintained its volume, but attentive listeners might have detected a slightly higher pitch than his usual low voice. Crockett again turned to Barron. Did you participate in creating these different operating procedures for your properties? Her question hung in the air, simple yet powerful in what it implied. Barron, with hands now visibly trembling on the table, responded, No, I've never seen these documents before. His voice had grown slightly stronger, as if the act of stating this truth had provided some inner support. Trump immediately stepped in.
He doesn't need to see every administrative document. I oversee everything." "Mr. Trump," Crockett interrupted calmly, raising her hand slightly, "the approval signature on this operating procedure is Barron's, not yours. I'm simply confirming whether he actually approved procedures that he himself says he's never seen." She didn't raise her voice or change her tone, yet her words seemed to fill the room completely. One of Trump's attorneys leaned forward to whisper in his ear, but Trump dismissed him with a subtle yet annoyed gesture. Cameras captured the movement. Barron looked at his water glass but didn't touch it. A bead of sweat had formed at his temple despite the cool temperature of the room. The committee chairman checked his watch and announced, "We'll continue with Representative Crockett's questioning." The subtle message was clear. No interruptions or delays would be allowed. "Representative Crockett." Trump now slightly raised his voice, his face starting to turn red from his neck up. "I suggest we focus on the actual tax documents, not administrative procedures. Do you have any concrete evidence of irregularity, or are we wasting the committee's time?" His attempt to regain control by challenging was a familiar tactic to those who had faced him across negotiating tables or in previous testimonies. "I appreciate your concern for the committee's time, Mr. Trump," Crockett responded, allowing herself a calculated moment of silence before continuing. The pause extended just long enough to be noticeable, a strategic rhythm she had perfected during her years as a public defender. She turned her attention fully to Barron, her posture open, her tone even.
"Barron, could you explain why your signature appears on quarterly statements containing contradictory information that were simultaneously sent to the IRS and to foreign investors in the properties under your direction?" Before Barron could respond, Trump intervened. "My son won't answer that. He's 19 years old. He's learning the business. Any document he signed was previously reviewed by our legal team. This attempt to use my son to construct some political narrative is—" "With all due respect, Mr. Trump," Crockett interrupted firmly, her voice cutting through his with precision rather than volume. "Barron is legally an adult and a registered executive of the companies in question. He has the right to answer for himself." Her eyes never left Barron's face, creating a connection that excluded the older Trump despite his physical presence. The room fell completely silent. Even the sound of breathing seemed suspended. Barron, visibly uncomfortable, looked at his father and then back to Crockett. The conflict played across his features, a lifetime of family loyalty warring with the immediate pressure of sworn testimony. He began, hesitant, the single syllable hanging in the air. "I signed documents that were presented to me, but I didn't," he paused, taking a deep breath, his shoulders rising and falling with the effort. I didn't personally review the numbers or compare versions." Each word seemed to cost him something, yet also to free him in some imperceptible way. "Are you aware," Crockett continued, "that the statements sent to Arab investors in Trump Tower Bickle report occupancy and revenue 30% higher than the numbers simultaneously reported to the IRS?" Her question was precise, factual, without adding her own opinion, yet its implications resonated through the chamber. Trump's face flushed visibly red. One of his attorneys was writing furiously on a notepad. The journalists present leaned forward in their chairs, fingers flying across keyboards. A congressional aide whispered something to the committee chairman, who nodded gravely in response. "I wasn't aware of that. No," Barron answered, his voice now firmer, as if each honest response strengthened his resolve. Trump's hand moved toward his son's arm, but stopped midway, aware of the cameras tracking every movement. Instead, he leaned forward to speak into his microphone. "These are complex business documents. My son wouldn't be expected to understand every detail." The chairman intervened. "Mr. Trump, please allow your son to answer the questions directed to him." Crockett maintained her focus on Barron, creating a conversational space that somehow excluded the powerful presence beside him. "Thank you for your candor, Barron. I have one more set of documents to discuss." She opened a yellow folder, removing what appeared to be email printouts. "These are communications between the Trump Organization's main accounting office and the management of your properties. They reference what are called Version A and Version B financial statements.
Were you briefed on the purpose of maintaining two versions of financial statements? The question hung in the air like a suspended weight. Trump's attorney scribbled a note and attempted to pass it to him, but Trump's attention was fixed entirely on his son, his expression a complex mixture of command and alarm. Barron's hands were now clasped tightly together on the table. No, I wasn't briefed on that. His voice had taken on a quality it hadn't possessed before, a clarity that seemed to surprise even him. Jasmine Crockett advanced with calculated precision. Barron, one last question. Would you be willing to sign today under oath a statement confirming that the tax documents for the properties under your name accurately represent actual revenues and expenses? The silence in the room was absolute. Even the ventilation system seemed to have paused. Trump turned completely to face his son, abandoning any pretense of casualness. His expression was an unmistakable mixture of alarm and silent command. Barron looked at his father for 3 complete seconds, then returned his gaze to Crockett. No, I would not sign that. The words were simple, barely above a whisper, yet they landed with seismic impact. Trump immediately intervened. He doesn't have sufficient experience to make such a judgment. As a father and the president of the organization, Mr. Trump, Crockett interrupted with precise calm. Your adult son has just exercised his right not to attest to the truthfulness of documents he himself signed. As a representative of this committee, I respect your decision, Barron. Trump, now visibly agitated, attempted to regain control. This is ridiculous. You're intimidating my son, manipulating his words. Mr. Trump, Jasmine responded with devastating calm, looking directly at Barron while she spoke. Courage has no age. The room froze. The photographers present captured the exact moment. Trump, with mouth half open, interrupted mid-phrase. Barron, with shoulders visibly more relaxed as if a weight had been lifted. And Crockett, with perfectly composed posture, her eyes communicating silent support to the young man for 7 full seconds. No one spoke. The chairman finally broke the silence. We'll take a 15-minute recess. No recess, Trump demanded. Let's continue. The recess has been called, Mr. Trump, the chairman stated firmly. We'll reconvene at 11:45. As staff and committee members began to move, journalists remained frozen in place, awareness dawning collectively that they had just witnessed a pivotal moment. Barron stood first before his father and walked toward the exit without looking back. Trump remained seated, his attorneys now clustered around him, speaking in urgent whispers. Jasmine Crockett gathered her notes methodically, her expression revealing nothing as she watched Barron's departure from the corner of her eye. The recess that followed buzzed with frantic activity. In the hallway outside, journalists huddled in tight groups, speaking rapidly into phones and recording devices.
She just said, "Courage has no age," and the entire room went silent. One reporter dictated, "The kid just flat out refused to back his father's story." Inside a small conference room adjacent to the main chamber, Trump's legal team surrounded him in a defensive formation, their urgent whispers occasionally punctuated by Trump's louder protestations. "Fix this," he demanded of his lead counsel. "I want a different arrangement when we go back in there." During those 15 minutes, Jasmine Crockett remained in the committee room, reviewing her notes and consulting briefly with staff. Unlike many of her colleagues who used such breaks for media soundbites, she stayed focused on the task at hand. A junior aide approached her with a message. "Representative Barron Trump is asking if he can speak with you privately." Crockett looked up, considered for a moment, then nodded. "Not privately. Bring him here where we're in full view, but keep others at a distance." The aide returned moments later with Barron, who appeared simultaneously more composed and more vulnerable than he had at the witness table. Standing at his full height without his father beside him, he looked older than his 19 years, yet his eyes held a question that was painfully young. "Representative Crockett," he began, his voice barely audible even in the relative quiet, "I want to clarify something." Crockett gestured to a chair positioned so that they were both visible to others in the room, but out of earshot. "Please have a seat, Barron. But before you say anything further, I want to be clear that I'm not your attorney, and anything you say to me isn't privileged." The young man nodded. "I understand. He hesitated, glancing around the room before continuing. "I want to do the right thing, but I don't want to hurt my family." "Those don't have to be mutually exclusive, Barron," Crockett responded, her tone softer than it had been during formal questioning, yet still professional. "Telling the truth often feels like betrayal when secrets have been normalized, but in the long run, truth protects everyone involved, even when it's painful in the moment." Barron studied his hands. "If I tell you I never reviewed those financial documents before signing them, does that make me legally liable?" Crockett chose her words carefully. "What makes you legally vulnerable is signing documents that contain false information, regardless of whether you reviewed them. But cooperating truthfully with this committee would certainly be considered favorably if any issues arose." She paused, then added, "This isn't just about legal consequences, though, is it?" Barron looked up, meeting her eyes directly for perhaps the first time. "My father has certain expectations," he said simply, the understatement carrying the weight of a lifetime. Before Crockett could respond, a commotion near the main doors signaled Trump's return. He entered with his legal team, scanning the room immediately for his son. When he spotted Barron seated with Crockett, his face darkened visibly. "Barron," he called across the room, his voice carrying an unmistakable command. "We need to speak before we continue." Barron stood, nodded once to Crockett, and crossed to his father. The elder Trump placed a hand firmly on his son's shoulder, steering him toward a corner where his attorneys waited. The conversation that followed was conducted in intense whispers, with Trump doing most of the talking, while Barron listened, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond his father's shoulder. When the committee reconvened minutes later, the atmosphere had shifted perceptibly. Trump had demanded and been granted a modification to the seating arrangement. He and Barron now sat side by side, though the younger Trump's chair remained angled slightly away from his father's. Trump's demeanor had changed as well. He projected an exaggerated calm that contrasted with his earlier agitation. The chairman reopened the session with a reminder about the rules of testimony and the penalties for perjury. "Representative Crockett, you may continue your questioning." Crockett nodded her thanks, then paused thoughtfully, seemingly reconsidering her approach given the dramatically altered circumstances. "Barron," she began, her tone respectful of the enormity of the choice he had made, "I want to be clear that this committee's purpose isn't to place you in legal jeopardy, but to understand the financial reporting practices of the Trump Organization properties. Given what you've testified to so far, I'd like to ask, when did you first become aware that there might be discrepancies between what these properties reported to tax authorities versus what they reported to investors?" Barron glanced briefly at his newly appointed counsel, who nodded slightly. He took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and leaned toward the microphone. "3 months ago," he answered, his voice steadier than it had been earlier. "I overheard a conversation between the chief financial officer and my father discussing what they called Version A and Version B reporting. I asked what that meant and was told it wasn't something I needed to concern myself with." A visible reaction rippled through the room. Trump's lead attorney placed a restraining hand on his client's arm as Trump began to rise from his seat. The chairman's gavel came down once. "Mr. Trump, I must remind you that interrupting testimony will not be tolerated." Crockett continued, maintaining her focus entirely on Barron. "After overhearing this conversation, did you take any actions to learn more about these different versions of financial reporting?" "I tried to," Barron replied. "I asked to see the complete financial records for the properties where I was listed as director. I was told they were being prepared for my review, but they never materialized. When I persisted, I was assigned a financial mentor who provided what I now realize were heavily edited summaries." "And when did you begin to suspect that you might be signing documents containing information you couldn't verify?"
Crockett's questions continued to create a space for Barron's testimony that somehow excluded the powerful presence of his father. Despite Trump's attempts to dominate the room with his silent fury, Barron's expression reflected the internal struggle of someone raised to trust family above all else, now confronting painful truth in the most public possible forum. "Last month," he said finally, "I received an email that was clearly intended for someone else. It contained instructions for preparing Barron's signing versions of documents with a note to remove the reconciliation section as usual. I asked what that meant and was told it was a standard formatting issue, but by then I had doubts." Donald Trump could no longer contain himself. "This is absurd," he erupted, rising to his feet despite his attorney's attempts to restrain him. "My son is being manipulated into creating a fictional narrative that—" "Mr. Trump," the chairman's voice cut through the outburst, "you are not recognized to speak. If you cannot control these interruptions, you will be removed from these proceedings." Trump remained standing for a moment, his face flushed dark red, before slowly returning to his seat. The damage, however, had been done. The contrast between his loss of composure and his son's quiet dignity registered with everyone present. Crockett waited for order to be restored, then continued with her questioning. "Barron, given what you shared with us, I want to ask a different kind of question. What made you decide to testify truthfully today, despite what must have been enormous pressure to do otherwise?" For the first time since the hearing began, Barron Trump looked directly at his father as he answered. "I was raised to believe that the Trump name stands for something, that it represents success, excellence, winning. But I've come to understand that none of those things matter if they're not built on truth." He turned back to Crockett, his voice gathering strength as he continued. "I'm 19 years old. I have my whole life ahead of me. I don't want that life built on decisions I'll have to keep hiding or explaining away." The simplicity and authenticity of his answer resonated through the chamber. Even hardened political operatives felt its impact. Somewhere in the back of the room, a reporter wiped away a tear as she continued typing. Crockett nodded, acknowledging the courage this response had required. "I have no further questions for Mr. Barron Trump at this time," she said, closing her folder. "But I would like to request that the committee formally subpoena the complete, unredacted financial records for all properties where he has been listed as a director or officer." "So ordered," the chairman replied. "We'll now proceed with questions from other committee members." What followed was a 3-hour session that delved deeply into the financial practices of the Trump organization. Throughout, Barron answered questions directly and honestly, acknowledging when he didn't know information and refusing to speculate about matters beyond his knowledge. Donald Trump, after one more outburst that earned him a formal warning, sat in seething silence, occasionally conferring with his attorneys, but otherwise watching as his carefully constructed financial narrative began to unravel through his youngest son's testimony. By late afternoon, when the hearing finally adjourned, the story had exploded across all media platforms. Outside the Capitol building, a crowd of reporters awaited the participants' emergence. Donald Trump exited first, surrounded by his legal team in a tight phalanx, ignoring all questions as he was hurried to a waiting black SUV. His expression was stone, his normally animated gestures absent, his entire bearing that of a man absorbing a blow he had never anticipated. 15 minutes later, Barron emerged, accompanied by his court-appointed counsel and 2 Capitol police officers provided for his security. Unlike his father, he paused briefly before the press. In the chaos of shouted questions, a veteran reporter from a major newspaper managed to make herself heard. "Barron, do you regret your testimony today?" The young man considered the question, then shook his head slowly. "No," he replied, his voice clear despite its softness. "I regret that it was necessary." Another voice called out, "Have you spoken with your father since the hearing?" "No," Barron answered simply. His counsel placed a gentle hand on his arm, signaling that he had said enough. As they began to move toward a separate waiting vehicle, a final question cut through the clamor. Representative Crockett said, "Courage has no age. What would you say to other young people facing difficult choices between family loyalty and truth?" Barron paused, turned back, and for the first time that day offered a small, sad smile. "That both can matter. that sometimes the most loyal thing you can do for your family is to break cycles that hurt everyone in the long run. With that, he turned and continued walking, leaving the assembled press corps in unusual silence. Inside the Capitol, Jasmine Crockett was conducting a brief formal press conference with the committee chairman. Unlike the emotional scene outside, this was a methodical presentation of next steps in the investigation. "Today's testimony has opened significant new avenues of inquiry," she stated, her tone professional rather than triumphant. "The committee will pursue these with the same diligence we bring to all oversight matters." When asked about her viral exchange with Barron Trump, Crockett responded with characteristic directness. "This investigation isn't about sound bites or trending phrases. It's about financial accountability and the rule of law. What matters isn't what I said to Mr. Trump, but the truth he chose to tell, despite tremendous pressure to do otherwise." She declined to speculate on the personal dynamics of the Trump family or the potential legal implications for either Trump, instead keeping the focus firmly on the committee's mandate and process. As evening fell across Washington, the story continued to evolve and expand.
Legal analysts dissected the potential ramifications of Barron's testimony, with many suggesting it could lead to broader investigations of Trump Organization financial practices. Political commentators debated the impact on Trump's standing within the Republican Party, where he remained a dominant but increasingly controversial figure. But beyond these expected discussions, something more significant was happening in living rooms, coffee shops, and dinner tables across America. The image of a young man choosing truth over family pressure and the simple phrase that had acknowledged that choice, "Courage has no age," had struck a chord that transcended political divisions. Parents discussed it with their teenagers. Teachers planned to reference it in character education lessons. Therapists noted how many clients brought it up in sessions about family dynamics and personal integrity. In a suburban home in Pennsylvania, a mother sat with her 16-year-old son watching highlights of the hearing on their television. "What would you have done?" she asked him during a commercial break. Her son considered the question seriously. "I don't know," he admitted. "It would be really hard." They continued watching in thoughtful silence. In a retirement community in Arizona, a group of residents in their 70s discussed the hearing over dinner. "Reminds me of when my son finally stood up to his father about the drinking," one woman shared. "Hardest and best day of our family life." Others nodded in recognition of the universal truth that had played out on the national stage. In a Manhattan high-rise not far from Trump Tower, Jasmine Crockett sat alone in a hotel room reviewing the day's events and preparing for tomorrow's continuation of the hearing. A phone had been turned off hours ago, the hundreds of notifications and messages too overwhelming to process after such an intense day. Instead, she focused on the evidence, the documents, the next steps in the investigation, the substance rather than the spectacle. Across town, in a different hotel suite, Barron Trump also sat alone. His phone, too, had been silenced, though not before he had received a simple text message from his mother. "I am proud of you." On the television, muted now, pundits continued to dissect every moment of his testimony. His life forever changed by the choice he had made. He felt a complex mixture of loss and liberation, grief and relief. The Trump family would never be the same after today. Yet somehow, paradoxically, he felt more truly a part of it than ever before. Not as an extension of his father's will, but as an individual who had honored the best of what the name could mean. Miles away in yet another part of the city, Donald Trump sat in intense conference with his legal team. The discussion centered on damage control, next steps, potential charges, and media strategy. But beneath the tactical planning lay a reality the former president was only beginning to absorb.
That his youngest son, the quiet one, the one he had perhaps noticed least among his children, had done what no political opponent, no prosecutor, no journalist had fully managed to do. He had cracked the foundation of the Trump mythology, not with attacks or accusations, but with simple, unvarnished truth. As midnight approached, social media metrics showed that "Courage has no age" had been shared over 6 million times across platforms. It appeared in posts about family dynamics, workplace ethics, political integrity, and personal growth. It had transcended its origins to become something universal. A recognition that moral courage isn't the province of the experienced or the powerful, but available to anyone willing to bear its cost. The hearing would continue tomorrow. Investigations would proceed. Legal consequences would unfold in the coming months. But something had already been decided in the court of public conscience. That a young man's quiet refusal to perpetuate falsehood, even at the cost of family loyalty, had demonstrated a form of strength more powerful than wealth, fame, or political influence. In her hotel room, just before turning out the light, Jasmine Crockett allowed herself a moment of reflection beyond the legal and political dimensions of the day. She thought about the unexpected courage she had witnessed, about all the young people who might see themselves in Barron's choice, about cycles broken and truth spoken. Her work as a representative was about systems and policies, laws and accountability, but today had reminded her of what undergirded all of those: the human capacity to choose truth even when every pressure pushes toward compromise. Courage has no age, she whispered to herself as she turned out the light. In the darkness, the phrase felt less like a viral moment and more like an ancient truth rediscovered, something that had always been waiting for the right moment to be spoken aloud. I could end it here, but what's really going to stay with you is in the next video. It's on your screen now, and honestly, it's the best thing you'll watch this week.